Hello, everyone. Welcome to a celebration of the writing career thus far of Aileen Kilgore Henderson. She recently celebrated her 100th birthday and has been a member of TWIG since the 1990s. She has had numerous publications in several genres. She has written for adults and children. She has written fiction. She has written memoirs, biographies, and feature articles. She won the Druid City Arts Award for Literature. That's given out at a maximum once every 2 years, and frequently it's not awarded at all. So sometimes it's only given out once every 4 years or 6 years. So it's a wonderful award. Welcome, Aileen. Do you have any comments you'd like to share?
And it was a large membership, many tables of people we met in the student center. I remember Margaret Cersei and Carol in that group. I don't know if there's anyone else from that time or not, but anyway, it was much better when we went to the library. We became more of a community gathering, and we grew smaller, but also I think we became more dedicated. And I'm looking forward so much to this. I've forgotten so many things that I did write about. And one of them is Go Read. Old Man Go Read. Is someone reading Old Man Go Read?
No, because it's waiting for a publisher and we cannot read it on this medium because it would affect its chances of publication.
Well, I think it won't be published. And I'm really looking forward to this because it will bring back so much like that I have forgotten. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so first up will be James Matthew Byers, and he's going to be reading from The Summer of the Bone Pal Monster. It's been published by Milkweed Editions in 1995. It's the winner of the Milkweed Prize for Children's Literature and also the winner of the Alabama Library Association Award. This is a fiction story for latency-age children. It's the story of two children who go to visit an elderly relative for the summer and come across all kinds of adventures, some of them quite scary.
Clip, chop, pull, cut. The watcher appeared to be wearing a sun hat, but it stood in the shadows. Clip, chop, pull, cut. He must pretend not to see it, for his planned success depended on surprise. When he reached the edge of the peanut patch nearest the apparition, clip, chop, pull, cut, he suddenly threw down his mattock with a ghastly shriek and sped toward it. Just as he had hoped, the watcher was stunned by his blood-curdling scream and sudden action and couldn't move. That allowed Hollis to cover half the space separating them, despite the kudzu writhing and coiling about his legs to hinder him. Hollis imagined himself a slippery eel slithering through an ocean of green seaweed. That way, he almost reached the watcher before it whirled and fled. It was no ghost. Hollis heard flying feet thudding the ground and branches and vines crashing and ripping. He sped into the green-draped forest after it. Racing along between high banks of kudzu was like going through a long tunnel because the trees, hanging with vines, closed in overhead. He could no longer hear those rapid running steps above the sound of his own panting. But he passed a ragged straw hat beside the trail. The speedster ahead of him had lost its hat but was too afraid to stop and pick it up. That gave Hollis courage, knowing that the watcher was more afraid than he was put wings to his heels. That's when Hollis let his guard down. That's when the huge leg and foot thrust out of the vines and tripped him. He was going forward at such a speed that the sudden obstacle sent him somersaulting through the air to crash against the kudzu. He fell so hard his neck would surely have broken if the vine hadn't cushioned him. Hollis blanked out. Rough hands jerking him to his feet brought back Hollis's senses. He tried to twist around to see his captor while he fought to get loose. "Let me go!" He kicked and he tried to bite, but powerful arms and huge hairy hands blocked him in place, his back against an enormous body that stank of old sweat and tobacco juice. Was this the live monster Josie spoke of with such loathing? The one he and Ruth heard that day in the bone pit? It wasn't the watcher he had chased, he was sure. It was too big, too strong. His captor spoke no word, only carted Hollis locked securely in its embrace toward a clearing where he could see the great piles of bones everywhere, jawbones with huge teeth in place, rib bones curving like barrel staves, except bigger, backbones the size of tree trunks, huge skulls with long alligator-like jaws studded with teeth, a bone yard for real. At last, he was in the heart of the bone pile hollow. But this wasn't the way he had meant it to be. He strained his eyes to take everything he could without letting the monster know he was looking. Bones, bones, bones! Ahead lay an orchard of draggled fruit trees with huge bones piled along the back edge like a high fence. Near it sat a house on what looked like a foundation of backbone joints.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. Next, we have Virginia McElroy, and she's going to be reading, again, published by Milkweed Editions. This one, The Treasure of Panther Peak for Latency-Aged Children, a novel. It's the winner of the New York City Library Best Books for the Teenage. And this story is set out in Big Bend, and it is the story of a young girl who travels with her divorced mother who's just taken a job as a teacher in Big Bend.
The mailman, dressed the same as Jamie and the men in the cafe, was wedged in with mailbags and packages, his long frame jackknifed under the wheel. Mom squeezed in front with him, while Paige had to climb in back and make a place for herself. Even before they left town, the dusty van rattled and bucked as if it didn't want to go. Paige braced herself for what was suspected would be the worst ride of her life. A wind whipped through the lowered window, snatching at her hair. The world was heating up, and the farther they drove south, the more intense the heat became and the sparser the vegetation. Jack Spencer said, "Panther Flat told me you'd be coming sometime this week, but they didn't mention the girl." "No," Mom said. Paige squirmed, her cheeks burning. Before she could make an angry retort, a scrambling sound in the floor distracted her. "A snake," she thought, jerking her feet up with a muffled exclamation. Mr. Spencer looked at her in the dusty mirror above his head. Over the noise of the car, she heard him say, "Don't be afraid, it's only Domingo." Paige held her breath, staring down where her feet had been. Gradually into view came tiny paws, then a small head and body. A trembling, pop-eyed dog looked up at her. Remembering how Carlotta liked to be petted, Paige lifted the little creature into her lap, feeling its rapid heartbeat and stroking his ears that were flattened with anxiety. She talked soft and low, and the dog hid its face in her jacket. "What does Domingo mean?" Mom asked. "Sunday in Spanish. Domingo was born on a Sunday." Paige raised her voice so the mailman could hear. "Is Domingo afraid?" "Yes," Mr. Spencer said. "Ever since my wife ran off and left us, he's been afraid." "Oh, I'm sorry," Mom said. "It's all right now." He turned to look at Mom and said, like announcing a verdict, "Not everybody can take this Big Bend country." Paige hugged Domingo tighter and stared out the window. "We have a saying down here," the mail carrier continued. that when God finished making the rest of the world, he dumped the leftovers in the big bin. Paige believed the story. Wherever she turned, she saw great piles of rocks, boulders spilled across the dry ground, so close together nothing but leafless plants could grow. The vast sky, now a burning blue, pressed down relentlessly, trying to keep her from breathing. Ahead of them, a tower of whirling dust rose up, like a savage giant fighting an invisible opponent. Then another one sprang up, not far away, and another one, till as far as she could see, whirlwinds moved among the stickers and stones, each involved in an eerie private dance that was also part of an enormous overall dance involving hundreds of dust columns, rising and falling, expanding and contracting, moving near, moving far. Devil's witches, Jack Spencer said. Count them. Paige tried. She reached nearly 50, counting by groups of 5, but they changed too fast. New ones rose up for no reason, and old ones subsided into quiet dust. She started counting again, but the erratic dancing, the disappearing, the reappearing, it confused her. They're always here, no matter the season, no matter the time of day, he said. Everything's still when you first come on the scene. Then one rises up and starts dancing. That gets the rest of them going, and they multiply by dozens. Paige looked back to see if the devil's witches settled down after the van passed, waiting to put on another show for the next car that came along. Stacked up bags and boxes kept her from seeing. Could the dancing witches be a warning to keep out at the Big Bend?
Okay, next is Jenny Howard. Jenny is going to be reading from The Monkey Thief. This also has been published by Milkweed Editions in 1997. It is subsequently published by Scholastic. It is the winner of the New York City Library Best Books for the Teenage. And The Monkey Thief is set in Costa Rica. It's about a young boy who goes from Minnesota to Costa Rica to help his uncle build a house and learns all about himself and about the world during this time.
Chapter 1. The big plane touched down on the runway of the San Jose airport, gradually breaking its speed as it bumped along towards the terminal. Steve Hansen pressed his face against the window for his first look at Costa. Only hours ago, he'd left Minnesota in the snow and ice of January. Now from the window, he could see the sunshine and blossoms of a different world. How he came to be here, ready to deplane and meet his Uncle Matt, was beyond understanding. One day, he was comfortably established in his do-nothing lifestyle. The next day, it seemed he was winging his way south to visit his uncle, who was setting up a nature preserve in the rainforest with some Costa Rican friends. We plan to have students come here to study, Uncle Matt wrote Mom and Dad right after Christmas. My partners travel and raise money for our project while I live in the forest and take care of it. I have to build a house while we're having the dry season. That doesn't give me much time. Will Steve come and help? Of course, I'd like to have Jennifer too, but I thought she'd rather come after the students arrive. Besides, she's so busy showing that champion horse and winning all those ribbons. Congratulations, Jeannie. Hoping the answer is yes from all of you. I'm enclosing Steve's ticket. He's just a couch potato, Steve's older sister said when she heard the letter. He can't build anything. Now, Jennifer, Grandma reproved her. Steve could do a lot of things. In the pause that followed, Steve knew that everyone was silently adding, if he only would. It's a great opportunity, Dad beamed. We'll talk to your teacher, Mom added, her eyes shining. Sometimes the school approves of leave for foreign travel. Why me, Steve had asked, reluctant. In all of his 12 years, he had never left his home state of Minnesota. You're his namesake, Dad said. Stephen Matthew. That makes you special to Matt. That surprised Steve. Nobody else seemed to think him special. In fact, everyone acted disappointed in him. At family get-togethers, his great aunts and great uncles looked over their spectacles at him and where he sat, minding his own business, and demanded, "Can't got your tongue, Steve? Say something." His cousins tried to get him to play ball, but the sun was too hot and the ants bit him. And he didn't see any sense to their quarreling and name calling. So no matter how hard he tried, Steve could never measure up to what others expected. And he finally gave up trying. He stayed in his room out of everybody's way as much as he could, watching television and munching on snacks. But that worried Grandpa. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't say anything. Is he sick? He's okay, Grandma said, putting her arm around Steve, who just stood there. One of these days he'll catch fire for something. Then watch out. And she rolled her eyes and made the sound of a siren. Steve didn't know what Grandma meant when she said he'd catch fire someday, but he didn't think much about it. Maybe it had something to do with communicating. That was a word he'd heard too often. His report card usually had some note on it about communicating. Steve needs to learn to communicate, or Steve lacks communication skills. Even when his parents came to school to confer about his trip, he overheard his teacher say, "In a strange country, Steve will be forced to communicate." And he sighed now, remembering, why was communicating such a big deal? And did his uncle truly think he was special? Sometimes he suspected his family and the school and Uncle Matt had ganged up on him, shipping him off to this place he never wanted to be. But as always before, he found it easier to go along with their plans than to resist. He hoped he'd recognize this uncle who supposedly thought he was special. Would Uncle Matt, like the others, end up being disappointed with him?
Next, we have Sharmila Mitra coming to us from Calcutta, India. She is going to read The World Through the Dime Store Door, an excerpt from it, published by University of Alabama Press in 2020. This is an adult memoir.
Miss O'Quinn is in charge of the office, Miss Hamner began. You'll check your purse in with her while you are at work. Do not take any money with you on the floor. You will always wear dresses and stockings. Be sure your seams are straight and that you have no runs. She showed us the lounge, a large room furnished with 2 chairs, a stool, a table, and a cot, all looking dingy and hard-used. Here's where you can eat your lunch and rest while you wait for the bell to go to work. We followed her downstairs to the floor where we had lessons in using the cash register and how to treat customers. And when you sell an item, right away you refill its space from the understock. Never let the space stay empty. Another strict rule. You may not call each other by first names. Always use Miss. And so I became for the first time Miss Kilgore. The one exception to the first name rule was our black porter, Harry Postel, whom we addressed as Harry. Miss Hamner gave us a warning. Be on the watch for pilferers, shoplifters. They are clever and cost crass money. Don't you try to handle any problem. Notify a floor walker right away if you suspect somebody. We were then assigned to a counter. I thought I had no preference. Hosiery, dry goods, toilet goods, candy, stationery, notions, toys, crockery, jewelry, it didn't matter. But I was assigned to hardware of all things. In dismay, I surveyed tools, and paint, dishpans, slop jars, and grotesque things that had no name and no purpose as far as I was concerned. I did not realize that I was in for an education more useful than anything I had had in school. I was learning about wrenches, monkey, open end, crescent, and pipe, how to test batteries, the different grades of sandpaper, and how each was used, and what was required to paint a dresser. Wrapping the items was a wrestle for me, especially slop jars and dishpans. Slop jars, that bedside convenience most country people needed, I learned to call combinates. We had two kinds, a gray enamel one with no lid for 50 cents and the cream-colored one with a lid for 60 cents. When a customer asked me for a blonde slop jar, I could hardly keep from giggling. My first big lesson of the new year at work was learning about counter stretchers. Miss Thompson was remaking a counter. She had it all torn up and seemed to be struggling with putting it back together. "This just won't fit," she said. "Run, ask Mr. McKibben for the counter stretcher." Eager to help, I found Mr. McKibben, a floor walker, changing window decorations. He looked taken aback at my request, but said, "Mr. Graves might know. Ask him." I sped downstairs to the basement to find Mr. Graves, assistant floor walker. He said, "I haven't used it. Ask Harry." Harry was on the street washing windows. He stopped and looked at me. "Miss Kilgore, they're fooling you. No such thing as a counter stretcher." How dumb I felt. I should have suspected they were having fun, sending me on a wild goose chase. I trudged back to Miss Thompson, who was grinning. "They don't know where it is," I said. "Somebody must have pilfered it." We laughed, and that was the end of it.
Thank you, Sharmila. Thank you. Okay. Next, we have Carolyn Rhodes. She's going to be reading a piece called Clarabelle. It was published in Alabama Heritage in the spring of 2001.
Hardly anybody recognizes a legend at first sight, even when it rubs against one's ankles and meows. So editor Grover Hall cannot be faulted for what happened that night in the 1930s when a scroungy calico cat appeared at the Montgomery Advertiser. He merely offered her a bit of coffee cream to tide her over. Little did he know it was Clarabelle inside that flea-bitten cat skin. Quicker than a blue wink, she moved into the newspaper offices and proceeded to train the inhabitants thereof to cater to her every wish, including suppers of beef, side dishes of country cream, half-open desk drawers for beauty naps, and typewriter keys to play with when deadlines threatened reporters. Old Grandma, the advertiser's nickname, was a pushover, this felonious feline. Soon, the public was captivated too. From the moment she essayed onto the paper's editorial page, she ran away with the show, as Hall himself admitted. She became the most talked about female in Montgomery, Alabama, quite a feat in Zelda Fitzgerald's hometown. Newspapers far and wide snapped up tidbits about Clarabelle. Fan mail rolled in, scholarly debates about her origin and ancestry appeared in the letter's columns. Requests for her kittens came from as far away as Ohio and New York. Editor Hall was kept busy clipping her press notices. Even he was astonished at her far-reaching fame. But Clarabelle had enemies too. They spread rumors she did not exist, that Hall invented her to be his mouthpiece for unpopular views. If she was real, those enemies argued, why hadn't Grover Hall adorned his newspaper with her photo? Clarabelle remained aloof from controversy. She was too busy trying to remedy the trouble with the world, which Hall claimed she thought to be a shortage of cats. Hall never let her nor anyone else forget that it was he who salvaged her from the alley. Often he reproached her for ingratitude. If cats had as much character as they have personality, human beings could go for them in a really big way. Dogs, horses, and Democrats are much more dependable. Another complaint against Clarabelle that Hall shared concerned her secrecy about her kittens. Now, when he suspected she had become a mother again, reporters were assigned to find the young. Clarabelle always outwitted them, however. Once Hall got a phone call from the jailhouse boys with the news that Clarabelle was taking her meals with them, and there was evidence her kittens were nearby. Hall's pride was cut to the quick. He reported this betrayal in the paper with the comment, so that's where this aging wench has been hanging out as of late. It miffed him that he could not bask in the glory of doling out her offspring to his favorites. He declared to all that he would publish her picture if Abel would pose with her family, if she would pose with her family. Otherwise, why should this newspaper exploit such a vainglorious hussy without benefit of kittens? Well, though able-bodied reporters failed to find the kittens, sometimes the kittens found the reporters. One night, a frizzly catling, still with its milk teeth, came toddling down a steep staircase right into the middle of a staff gab fest. Instantly, it was pounced upon, offered a nickel's worth of milk, of which it drank 2 drops, then whisked into a taxi cab for delivery to a little girl on the kitten waiting list. And Clarabelle, wrote Hall, about this incident, well, she drank the rest of the milk, shook her hind legs, sniffed scornfully, and departed without indicating whether she felt any emotional shock at the loss of one of her babies. One can never tell about Clarabelle. As for her photograph, it had to be taken on Clarabelle's terms after all, sans kittens. Hall introduced it this way. There has been a public clamor for a pictorial view of her ladyship, but it is only now that we are able to satisfy this demand. It is exclusive, of course. No other newspaper on earth is carrying this picture today. For Clarabelle, life had its ups and downs as well as its downs as well as its ups. Hall described her closest call. Well, a stranger tried to kill Clarabelle a few days ago, but she was too tough for him. She had done no injury. She had done him no injury. Indeed, she had not even offended. Some unaccountable impulse, according to the report brought to this department, caused the man to seize her by the hind legs and beat her head against a stone wall. She was thought to be seriously injured, but that night she ate 2.5 wieners for supper, drank some fresh water, and went to sleep on a reporter's desk. She had been frisky ever since. Such narrow escapes worried her fans. Dear editor, wrote one, what in the world has become of Clarabelle? Did she ever come back? I am a firm believer in advertising, so I am enclosing 25 cents for a lost and found ad, wrote a subscriber. Now, Hall denied Clarabelle was lost and offered to return the quarter. The last paragraph of Hall's editorial was significant. Clarabelle is aging and slowing down. She is not the gal she used to be, and we greatly fear that her days are numbered. On August morning in 1940, Editor Hall clobbered his readers with the headline, "Clarabelle Gives Up the Ghost." He wrote, "In a flower bed not far from a private residence, not far from the Advertiser building in which she became a legendary character, Clarabelle, the editor's office cat, overcome by the fatigue and cares of a lifetime, lay down and did not get up again." Hall accepted as Clarabelle's just due the notice in the New York Times, the announcement over WLW Cincinnati, the two-page spread with photograph in a South Carolina daily, and all the other publicity attending her rite of passage. North Carolina editor Jonathan Daniels sent a rhyme tribute that caused Editor Hall to testify. Jonathan Williams also can write poetry. He sent the Advertiser a poem on the death of Clarabelle. It's felonious feline, but as we don't print poetry on dead cats, we are omitting the Daniels effort. 2 floral offerings arrived as a cluster of yellow top weeds tied daintily with a red ribbon. The Associated Press obituary described throughout the country cast Hall in the role of a grieving hero. Clarabelle would have greeted that with a scornful kick off her hind leg as she makes her exit. A minority of subscribers felt like the man who said, "I'm glad that damn cat is dead. Now let me give you a cocker pup." Hall refused the offer, but he closed the saga of Clarabelle with a plea. Quote, "At this moment of sadness, the Advertiser beseeches its friends and the followers of Clarabelle not to give this office another cat. The Advertiser is fed up on cats and does not wish to be bothered with another one. There is no possible substitute for Clarabelle in this office, so skip it. Tough and truthful, a fit epitaph for a newspaper cat."
Thank you, Carolyn. Okay. Next up is Angel Carter. And Angel is going to be reading from the book Tuscaloosa Stories. She's going to be reading Eileen's selection, Magic at the New Bama Theater, May 1938. This is a memoir for children written at about a 4th grade level. It was published by Borgo Publishing in 2019.
Mama and I, in Tuscaloosa for the day, made our simple purchases and then were free until Daddy got off from work to take us home. As we came out of the store, I announced, "We're finished. Now let's go to the show." I was wild about the movies, and I had read about the wonderful new Bama Theater. I had to see it. Of course, the admission price was prohibitive. Now that I was 16, I was considered an adult and must pay 30 cents. I had held on to 60 cents from the typing I did for my teacher's husband, and it was burning a hole in my pocket. "I think not," Mama said. "There's no sense spending money with nothing to show for it." "But you'll see Clark Gagel and Myrna Loy," I insisted. "It's test pilot and has lots of airplanes and things." "I see all the airplanes I want to flying over the house every day," she said. "Oh, but Mama, the new theater is more than just a movie theater," I protested. "Didn't you read about it in the paper? And the main floor is a beautiful Spanish garden, and the ceiling is full of lighted stars twinkling in a dark sky." I took a deep breath. "And the article said that misty clouds drift overhead, and you've transported to a paradise." I knew the details by heart, but added some of my own. She couldn't understand what a world of magic was waiting for us. Daddy wouldn't get off from work until 5, Here was my chance, and I couldn't miss it. I gave Mama 3 dimes from the 6 I clutched in my hand, and she set out for J.C. Penney to buy what she wanted. I went in the opposite direction, headed for the corner of 6th Street and Greensboro Avenue. As I loped past the big clock near the skyscraper bank on Main Street, I noticed its hour hand pointed to 1. I'd be just in time for the first show. I approached the building almost on tiptoe. A little depot standing alone out front with a girl inside must be the ticket place, I decided, so I laid down my 3 dimes. The girl punched a button and a ticket shot out. I took it and turned to face a vast frontage of shining glass and chrome. Where was the door? I could not find it. I hung around hoping someone would come along and go in ahead of me, or else come out so I could know which of those shiny glass wall areas was the entrance. I was determined not to let anyone guess that I was the country bumpkin that I really was. Finally, I noticed a man in a white uniform standing inside. I pushed on the glass panel nearest him and it opened. The gold-braided man held out his hand and I gave him my ticket. Then I stepped into the lobby and found myself confronted on every side with more doors. None of them had signs. With false self-assurance, in case someone was watching, I headed for the nearest one. It opened on a stairway. I went up 3 flights, finding elegance on every landing. Large gold-framed mirrors, soft pillowed sofas, graceful chairs, and what looked like real paintings. I almost bogged down in the deep carpets, all in rich colors. Everything was so imposing and so grand, I felt overwhelmed. I heard typewriter keys clacking, so I knew this 3rd floor must be the business part of the theater. I turned a corner and entered a long, wide hall with more elegant chairs, divans, mirrors, lighted lamps, and paintings. The deep, noiseless rugs tripped me. Everywhere I looked, there was so much beauty and luxury. I felt I was walking through the pages of the House Beautiful magazines Aunt Clara brought us. Music drifted around me. Following the sound, I located steps that led up. I had found the balcony. For a minute, I admired the sky. Yes, the stars. They looked as real as Brookwood stars. But something was happening on screen, so I crept down the dark aisle to a seat in the front row. Right away, I was dissatisfied, not liking that I had to look down at the picture. But the newsreel had begun before I got up the courage to leave and take up my search again for the Spanish Garden. I lit out down the hall in what I thought would be the right direction, peeking in every door I passed. The beautiful women's lounge invited me in, but I didn't have time to investigate. I could hear talking now. The main show was on. Farther down the hall and up some more steps, and here I was in the balcony again. By now, I was so desperate, I would have asked directions, country bumpkin or not, but in all of these nooks and crannies, not another soul crossed my path. I came back in the hall and went in what I thought was the opposite direction from the one I had been going. With a sigh of relief, I found the steps down to the lobby, and following the sound of airplane motors, I arrived in the Spanish Garden. I could see twining vines and big blossoms and what looked like fruit. The sky was much prettier from there. I studied it, but couldn't discover how the clouds rolled back and forth. At the same time, I was also watching Myrna Loy and Clark Gable emoting on screen. But when Spencer Tracy appeared, my attention was totally his. I thought Loy was lovely, Gable handsome, but Tracy was marvelous as Gunarm, the gum-chewing mechanic with his look of such kindness. I forgot how hard I had struggled to find them, and I was in the story with them. At 5 o'clock, bewitched and dazed, I came out into the daylight of Tuscaloosa, more determined than ever to force my parents to share this magical world. I met Mama in the lobby of the McLester Hotel. She had spent her 30 cents for a remnant, a pretty red fabric sprinkled with white flowerets, enough to make a skirt for one of us girls, or to line a quilt. During the following weeks, I renewed my nagging. I stressed the wonders of the Spanish Garden and the sky that shone with stars. Daddy said, gee, I sure would like to see that sky. Finally, Mama agreed to go. I carefully studied the film schedule. I wanted something to make them laugh, to forget the Great Depression that they dealt with every day. That's why I turned down Boys Town, even though Spencer Tracy was in it. I was afraid it would be sad. Finally, I picked Alexander's Ragtime Band. During the show, I kept glancing at them to see how they were reacting, but in the flickering light, I could only see them staring straight ahead. At the end of the movie, as we made our way toward the door, Mama said, we'd better hurry to the grocery store before it closes. Daddy had to count what money he had so we would know how much we could buy. It took a lot of thought and consultation to fit our food needs to our funds. When we finished loading our purchases, dark was coming, and we had to hurry home to take care of the night work. We had no time to talk about the show until we sat down for supper. Well, how did you all like the movie? I asked. Mama said, that music was too loud. It deafened me. Daddy said, gee whiz, Aileen, I forgot to look up at the sky. Taken aback, I could only say, well, that means we have to go again, doesn't it? They looked down at their cornbread and buttermilk and said nothing. Yet I understood. They didn't want to hurt my feelings, but they could not be a part of my magic make-believe Hollywood world. They could not share it. We never mentioned the theater again.
Thank you, Angel. Thank you so much. Okay, next we have Dean Bonner, and he's going to be reading The Horses of Lost Valley, an excerpt from it. Published by Author House in 2016, this novel was the winner of the Purple Dragonfly Book Award. This is the story of a young boy, about 12 years old, who finds his meaning and his self-confidence through taking care of horses.
That spring, Southern California had very little rainfall, and the summer brought no rain at all. Tillery was aware of the usual summer brush fires, but they were inland and held no threat for San Diego, he thought. He felt secure until an August evening when he was home, giving his room a long overdue cleaning. He half heard Walter Cronkite's serious words coming from the family room until out of control fires raging westward grabbed him. He dropped the vacuum cleaner and rushed to the TV to perch on the sofa beside Dad. Devastating wildfires blazing across rural San Diego County, driven by a scorching Santa Ana wind, destroying hundreds of acres east of the city, now heading down the tender dry canyon for San Diego. And Lost Valley Stable is in that canyon. Next morning, without waiting for breakfast, Tillery raced for the stable. He found people going about their chores as usual, but keeping an anxious watch toward the mountains inland, where clouds of black smoke boiled up in several places. Curly, followed by Caesar, came by Zippy's pen. Looks like we're gonna have to evacuate, kid. Has Ms. LeMay made arrangements for old Zip? I haven't heard from her, Till said, a tremor in his voice. You better go over to the house and call her. That east wind's blowing those fires right this way. The shopping center, won't it stop the fires? Tillery asked. Not if they come down the canyon on each side of it, Curly said. The brush in those canyons is like tinder, and the east wind's picking up. Tillery hated the hot east wind that everybody called a Santa Ana. This was always bad news. Now a Santa Ana was blowing fire straight for the stable. He ran to Bo's house to telephone Mrs. LeMay, but she didn't answer. He ran back outside to look at the smoke clouds coming nearer. Strange horse trailers and trucks were pulling in and parking, waiting. He ran back inside and dialed Ms. LeMay again. No answer. What should he do? Go home? Stay? How could he save Zippy? He ran to find Curly. They're probably safe for the night, Curly said, unless that wind turns into a gale, which won't happen before tomorrow, I'm thinking. By then, you'll probably get a hold of Miss LeMay. But you better send somebody down here on the double to get old Zip. Tillery had forgotten that this was the weekend for his family trip to the mountains north of San Diego to buy apples. It was a big event of the year, a time they all look forward to, eating their meals at a famous bakery up there and visiting an orchard where they pick their own apples. Browsing through the roadside swap meets and staying at a fabulous Western Inn. In other years, Tillery had fun on the annual trip, but this year he was too worried. As he was late for supper that night, he ate alone in the kitchen while he listened to Mom, Dad, and Kim planning the trip over a spread out map. This year, what do you say we go to some new orchards and maybe try some different kinds of apples, Dad was saying. We'll see more of the mountains that way too, Mom said. Let's explore some ghost towns, Kim said. Tillery, come see where we're going, Dad called. But Tillery was on his way to phone Mrs. LeMay again. A man answered this time. The LeMays are gone, he said, back east to see their daughter. When will they be back? Tillery asked between clenched teeth. That I can't tell you, the man said. I'm just staying in the house at night to protect it. How can I get in touch with them? Tillery pressed him. I don't know that either. I'm sorry. They call here once a week or so, but I don't know where they are. Their house, Tillery said desperately. I've got to find out about their horse, get him to safety. I didn't know they had a horse, the man interrupted firmly. I can't help you at all. Sorry, and he hung up. Tillery stood holding the phone and gnawing at his fingernails. Come on, Tillery, Mom called. We're packing. There won't be time in the morning. We're leaving early, Kim chimed in. Sweat broke out on Tillery's forehead. He walked slowly into the living room. I'm not going, he said, 3 pairs of eyes fixed on him in astonishment. I can't go. There's nobody to save Zippy from the fire except me. That horse is his owner's responsibility, Dad insisted, not yours. Tillery explained about the LeMays being away and out of touch. Zippy has nobody else. Nobody. All of us go every fall on our apple trip, Mom said reproachfully. It's a family tradition. You can't break a family tradition for a home that doesn't even belong to you. Someone's sure got to haul Zippy away if the fire comes close, don't you think? Kim interrupted. Right, Dad said. Besides, Till, you wouldn't be able to do anything to help. You're just a boy. So come on, if San Diego gets smoky, we'll be in the clean air in the mountains. Remember that big swap meet at the top of the mountain? We never know what we'll find there, do we? Tillery and Dad got a big charge from the swap meet. Last year, they bought a flensing knife for $1 from a man who had no idea that it dated from San Diego's long ago whaling days, a part of history from an old-time whaling ship. He and Dad had mounted the long knife above the garage door. People often inquired about it. They'd even had an offer of $50 for it. Tillery felt himself weakening. Here was a way to make money to someday buy his own horse, maybe even buy Zippy. Somebody should help, so save Zippy from the fire. Curly wouldn't let him burn up, would he? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dean. Next, we have Laura Hunter. She's going to be reading from Tenderfoot Teacher, Letters from Big Bend, 1952 through 1954. This is an adult collection of letters published by TCU Press in 2002.
April 11th, 1953. A letter to her father. Dear Daddy, yesterday I was 32 years old. Sigh, where are the years going? The fly in the ointment here, though, is the rattlesnake. Those who've lived here a long time don't get off the trails this time of the year because they're lurking everywhere. The Garrisons, the house nearest me, had one on their porch last week. Only Karen, my 7th grader, and her grandmother, who doesn't see well, were at home. The grandmother was sweeping under the porch swing and found a kind of stick she couldn't dislodge no matter how hard she swept it with the broom. Fortunately, she called Karen, who saw it was a rattler, and called a neighbor to kill it. It was a traditional brown rattler. We have also green ones and beautiful red racers. Now, I guess if I'm sensible, my after school walks will have to end because there are no trails back and the coach's foot trails. May 1, 1953, Sunday. Dear Mama, every day here has been so windy. Last week we had the worst dust storms park people remember. For about a week, the Del Carmens, our most beautiful mountains, were invisible. Then one day, as if someone had lifted a curtain, there they were again. I told you how Danny embarrassed me at the Reese's Easter breakfast by shrieking for me to look quick. There was a new fire guard. If I had known how nice he was, I would certainly have craned my neck to look. I didn't meet him until my birthday dinner with the Garrisons when he came over for dessert and coffee. I thought at that time, if I were 18, I'd certainly wave my eyelashes at him. His name is Arthur. He is 28, the son of a St. Paul medical doctor, intelligent, nice-looking, a Lutheran who doesn't drink or smoke. He is here for the same reason I am, to find out about the place. Every day he comes across the door to see me. When I was at May's on Sunday night, when she was having other guests, she also invited him, but he had to cancel at the last minute because of a fire down on the river. He has been over twice a day and is bringing steak for our supper tonight. Yesterday, after he got off from work, he came and mopped the whole school. He has rigged up his radio for me with an aerial. Everybody has fallen for him, especially the children, even Steve. One night, Art brought up a bottle of milk that had soured. He has no refrigerator in his tent. He thought I might use it in cooking, which I do a lot of. I insisted he take a bottle of sweet milk in place of the sour so he would have something to drink. It was Monday and he would have no more milk until the following Sunday. Only we two were involved, and I do not know how anyone else knew about it, but at fire school, which all Park men are attending now, the men were being fined for foolish and funny reasons to make money for their coffee break. Harold fined Art a quarter for bringing sour milk to the teacher's house and taking sweet milk away. And Art is Aileen's husband.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much. Okay, next up we have Lori Fowler. She's going to be reading from Hard Times for Jake Smith, which was published by Milkweed Editions in 2004. It's the winner of the Alabama Library Association Award. This is a book for latency-age children who need to perhaps know something about the Great Depression. And this is about a little girl who is left pretty much on her own to find her way through this really difficult time. Lori?
Ma came softly into the room, bringing fried grease odors with her. In the dark, she shook Mary Jake by the shoulder. "Get up." She kept her voice low. Paul turned over, rustling the corn shucks, and gave a deep sigh. "Put on your new dress. Tie up your other things in the dish towel. Remember, leave your overalls here. See if you can get your shoes on somehow, then wake the boys. They can wear their everyday clothes. We're going, Mary Jake thought, but I'm dressing up and they're not. Why? She clenched her teeth, but that did not stop her trembling. Her few things were ready for tying in the bundle. She rolled her overalls and flimsy shirt as small as her tremulous hands could make them and put them in the bundle too. The old soft clothes took up so little room Ma would never suspect. The new dress slipped smoothly over her head and hung loose without a belt line. She could see the whiteness of the leaves in the dark. She had just about outgrown her bloomers. The tight elastic squeezed her waist and each of her legs, cutting off circulation, she was sure. She felt around in the dark corner for her shoes and shook out the spiders before forcing her feet into them. Then she woke her brothers, half dragging them through the kitchen to the wash pan on the porch shelf. With a half comb that stayed on the shelf, she made their hair neat and then her own. My 3 towheads, Ma would say, admiring her work. Without a mirror to linger over, they were soon ready for breakfast. After a quick, silent meal, they filed out to the car where Pa waited. He arranged the boys on top of what was packed in the back seat. They looked comfortable, half lying in a nest, surrounded on all sides by boxes. They watched in the morning twilight as Ma sat in the middle of the front seat and told Mary Jake to get in beside her. Mary Jake fitted her shoe-clad feet among the clay jugs of water for drinking and the car radiator and settled her bundle on her lap. Through the thin dish towel, she felt the metal fasteners on her overall galluses. Pa came from checking through the house once more and got in under the steering wheel. With sunrise drawing near, the sky seemed to catch fire and reflect the flames onto the earth. It's the dust, Ma said, looking up. Seems as if all of Oklahoma must be blowing over here to Alabama. More than just Oklahoma, Pa said, grinding the car starter. Texas, too. Grr, grr, the car motor said. Nothing happened. After several more tries, Pa found the crank under the seat and went to the front of the car and bent over to hand crank it. Ma sat under the steering wheel, pushing levers when he shouted directions. Mary Jake clutched her bundle, looked straight ahead, and said nothing. The car wouldn't start, but she didn't rejoice. She had the desolate feeling that whether the car started or not, or suddenly jerked into motion and ran over Pa, or the crank reversed and broke his arm, nothing could interfere with what was happening. David and Paul kept still and quiet. The engine came to life with a cough and a backfire, and Pa drove them out of the yard. East was at their back, but Mary Jake knew by the light flooding the world that the sun had come above the treetops. The car took them past Mary Jake's school, closed and silent this early, through the town and along a paved road she hadn't seen before. After what seemed like 2 hours, they came to a wide bare place where a dirt road connected to the one they traveled. Pa pulled to the side and stopped. Here's where you get out, Mary Jake, he said. See how this road goes into the woods? You follow that. Ma said, listen carefully, Mary Jake. Follow only the road that bears to the left. Do not take the fork to the right. You hear me? The left fork is for you. In a little bit, you'll come to a settlement called Rock Castle. The houses, the post office, and the store are clustered around a stone house with turrets. The Rock Castle, they call it. Don't stop at any house except the Rock Castle, Pa interrupted, reaching across Ma and gripping Mary Jake's arm hard. No matter who you meet or what they say, go to the Rock House. Just tell them your name, Mary Jake Wildsmith. Give them this. Ma slipped a white handkerchief with a lump into one lacy corner into Mary Jake's hand, forcing her numb fingers to close over it. Ma opened the car door. Do as I say now. The left-hand fork and straight to the Rock House, no other. Mary Jake could not make herself move. She won't do it, Pa said in disgust. We better carry her there. Oh, no, Ma shrank down in the seat. Her voice sounded panicky. Mary Jake will do it. She is an obedient child, and Ma nudged her out of the car. Mary Jake stood by the road, clutching her handkerchief in her bundle, watching the car go west. 2 towheads with bowl haircuts raised up out of their nest, looking back at her as long as the car was in sight. She made no movement for a long time, staring at where the car had disappeared. She was like Adder the day she found him, but she did not have Adder's hope. She knew her folks were never coming back for her.
Thank you, Lori. Okay, next we have TK Cassidy. She's going to be reading Ezel and the Black Speckled Gizzard Stone which is a folk tale that has been told and retold. This is from the Appalachian Folk Tales, published by the Jesse Stewart Foundation in 2010. TK?
In a log cabin on a hillside lived an old woman and her red-bone hound, Ezel. The old woman and her dog were not friends. She wanted Ezel to go with her when she hoed the peanut patch. She wanted him to listen to her while she talked. She wanted him to sleep at night on the starflower quilt she had made to cover her bed. Ezel wouldn't do any of those things. All night he napped on the feather pillow in his chair by the fireplace. All day he waited for the old woman to bring him tasty tidbits to eat. But Ezel was never satisfied. If she brought him one biscuit, he wanted two. If she brought him 2 hoe cakes, he wanted cornbread instead. If she served him syrup, he wanted jelly. What's more, Ezel's tasty tidbits had to be served on time. He demanded his breakfast when the clock over the fireplace struck 8. He expected his dinner when the clock struck 12 times. And his supper had to be served on the dot of 6, or Ezel threw a temper tantrum. Ezel's temper tantrum scared the old woman. Ezel's crossness made her unhappy. When she came near his chair, Ezel shut his eyes. He refused to wag his tail. I declare, Ezel, you are no friend at all. He was no helper either. He wouldn't chase rabbits that gnawed the right pawpaw on the bush at the water well. He wouldn't bark away the jaybirds that ate the shiny blackberries growing beside the yard gate. He would not even growl at the possums that tiptoed to the porch and stole the kumquats from the kumquat tree. That red-bone hound would not do anything to please the old woman. One day she worked all alone on the peanut patch. Her sharp little hoe went chop, chop, choppity chop, while she wondered what tasty bits she could take up to the cabin for Ezel. The sun shone down from straight above her head. She knew the clock over the fireplace would strike 12 times soon. What could she serve Ezel for his dinner? She worried about that red-bone hound, and she hoed. Chop, chop, choppity chop went the little hoe again and again. The old woman heard the porch floorboards creak crack. In a while, she heard the yard gate click clack. Halfway down the hill, she heard the well chain rattle. The old woman knew Ezel was coming to get her. She hoed faster. Chop, chop, choppity chop. Ezel sat down on the edge of the peanut patch and frowned at the old woman. I'm coming, she called to him. Just one more row to hoe. Ezel frowned a wrinkled, fierce frown. He shut his eyes tight against the sunlight and refused to wag his tail. He was very, very cross because his dinner was late. The old woman hoed faster and faster. Chop, chop, choppity chop. But suddenly the hoe went clunk, clunkety thud. The old woman stopped and looked. She bent over and looked closer. A thing like a black speckled potato lay there in the dirt in the peanut patch. It did not move. Ezel came to look too. A gizzard stone, the old woman gasped. A dinosaur gizzard stone. Ezel stretched his neck to sniff the smooth, black speckled stone. He sniffed a little smell. He sniffed again, a big smell. His eyes popped open wide. He tasted the gizzard stone with his wet red tongue. Then he clamped the gizzard stone with his strong white teeth. No, no, Ezel, said the old woman. This is a dinosaur gizzard stone. It does not belong to you. It must stay here in the peanut patch. Ezel did not listen to what the old woman said. He whirled and ran up the hill past the well. The well chain rattled. He shoved the garden gate open with his nose, click, clack. He ran across the porch, creak, crack. Ezel hopped into his favorite chair in front of the fireplace. He sank down on his soft feather pillow. He clasped the gizzard stone with his paws and whined with joy. The old woman stood alone in the peanut patch, watching Ezel disappear into the cabin. The red-boned hound had run away with the black speckled gizzard stone. The stone did not belong to him. It belonged in the peanut patch, but Ezel never listened to her. She sighed, finished the hoeing the peanut plants. Ezel kept the gizzard stone with him in a special chair all day. When the old woman brought him a pan of cool well water to drink, he refused to look at her. When she said, Ezel, we must take the gizzard stone back to the peanut patch, Ezel hid the stone against his chest. He would not listen. That night, when the old woman went to bed under the starflower quilt, Ezel lay sound asleep on his pillow with a black speckled gizzard stone tucked under his chin. The fire burned low in the fireplace. The darkness inside the cabin was quiet. The darkness outside the cabin was quiet. Nothing stirred anywhere. The clock over the fireplace struck 12 times. Midnight. Down in the peanut patch, something rumbled and grumbled. A loud voice snarled, "Give me back my black speckled gizzard stone." The old woman heard the loud voice. Ezel heard it too. In one long leap, he landed on the old woman's bed, gizzard stone and all. She pulled the starflower quilt over their heads. They lay still. Halfway up the hill, the well chain rattled. The angry voice demanded, "Give me back my black speckled gizzard stone." The old woman and Ezel shrank themselves as small as they could in the bed. Click, clack, the front gate opened and shut. The voice bawled, "Give me back my black speckled gizzard stone." The old woman and Ezel stopped breathing under the starflower quilt. Creak, crack, the floorboards on the porch. "Give me back my black speckled gizzard stone." The voice was so loud it pained the old woman's head. "Ezel," the old woman whispered, "give it back, its black speckled gizzard stone." Ezel locked his jaws around the gizzard stone. He would not listen to the old woman. She tugged on the stone with all her might. Ezel trembled so hard the bed shook, but he would not let it go. Then the voice roared directly above them, "I want my gizzard stone right now!" A tornado exploded. Whoosh! The starflower quilt shot straight into the rafters, leaving the old woman and Ezel uncovered in the dark. They were lifted, thrown down, and flung around. Thunder thumped on every side. 1,000 rusty bells ran, jammed, bammed in their ears. The bed bucketed in the middle of a snowstorm of feathers from Ezel's favorite pillow. Swoosh! The fire in the fireplace sucked up the feathers into the chimney like a giant vacuum cleaner. The bed spun around, the old woman and Ezel right in behind the feathers. There was only one way to save them. The old woman pinched Ezel's tail hard. Ezel yelped, the stone dropped, and the old woman grabbed it. "Here's your black speckled gizzard stone," she shouted, and she threw it as far as she could. The room stood still. In the quiet, the feathers from Ezel's favorite pillow settled down around them as light as snowflakes. On the porch, the floorboards creaked-cracked. In the yard, the front gate click-clacked. Halfway down the hill went the wall chain rattled. Whomp, echoed the peanut patch. Then silence. The fireplace burned low in the fireplace. The darkness inside the cabin was quiet. The darkness outside was quiet. Nothing stirred anywhere. The old woman and Ezel fell asleep. The next morning they jumped out of bed before sunrise. They ate breakfast without a single complaint from Ezel. They hurried outside together. Ezel looked around with wide-opened eyes. He pounced on every possum that tiptoed to the porch to steal the kumquats from the kumquat tree. He barked away flocks of jaybirds that ate the blackberries growing beside the yard gate. He chased dozens of rabbits gnawing on the right pawpaws on the bush by the water well. Whenever the old woman talked, he perked up his ears and wagged his tail to show he was listening. After a busy day, the old woman went to bed. Ezel curled himself into the neat mound on the starflower quilt. The old woman smiled. "I declare, Ezel, you're the best friend anybody could want. You go everywhere with me." Well, almost everywhere. There was one place Ezell wouldn't go with the old woman. Can you guess where? The peanut patch.
Okay, thank you so much, TK. Okay, next is Beth Sherrill. She's going to be reading from a biography for adults called Eugene Allen Smith's Alabama, How a Geologist Shaped a State, published by New South Books in 2011.
Alabama had been without a geologist since the death of the able Michael Toomey in 1857. Smith had little to build on, as most of Toomey's scientific papers and collections burned with the university. Other setbacks included the failure of the camp wagon and expense account to materialize. Smith had to arrange a means of travel himself and pay expenses out of his own funds. He requested passes from railway officials that saved money but limited the range of his investigations. He had to maintain any equipage he rented. He had the wagon's axles greased every morning and paid for blacksmith services, 20 cents to shoe one mule foot and 35 cents for mending the wagon's coupling pole, and 50 cents a day for a driver who also cooked and took care of the mules. He also paid varying sums to be ferried across the many bridgeless streams. Night crossings cost more. Besides these adversities, Smith coped with the extremes of summer weather, the inevitable chills and fevers, and the plagues of seed ticks and chiggers that kept sleep at bay. In the almost 6 decades from Dr. Smith's appointment as a University of Alabama professor until his death in 1927, the little doc proved himself to be a giant. He was instrumental in transforming Alabama from its impoverished post-Civil War agricultural economy into the state with the most diverse economy in the South. In addition to his duties as professor of geology, mineralogy, chemistry, and agriculture, Dr. Smith enriched the lives of the University of Alabama. He organized its symphony, rebuilt its library, and helped found its athletic program. He organized the annual field day and supported football and baseball. He personally watched university buildings being willfully destroyed by a Union general in April 1865. His influence resulted in almost 50,000 federal acres being set aside for reparations for burning the university. Smith rebuilt the core collections of what became the Alabama Museum of Natural History in Tuscaloosa. The antebellum collection had also been destroyed by Union troops. Smith's many contributions to the museum culminated in the dedication of the current museum building in 1910, a building that he designed and which bears his name. Thanks in part to Dr. Smith, the museum ranks among the finest natural history museums in the country. He collaborated in publishing the first complete listing of Alabama plants, and he was the first who recognized the archaeological significance of Moundville. It was, however, his service with the Geological Survey of Alabama as state geologist that enabled him to amass an unparalleled storehouse of knowledge that provided opportunities for Alabama and its people. He advocated a mixed economy, and he identified resources to realize economic diversity, especially mineral resources, but also the potential for linking Birmingham and Tuscaloosa by a lock and dam system. He not only disseminated information in scientific papers and official reports to the state government, but also in hundreds of articles in the popular press. Consequently, those seeking investment opportunities, especially Northern industrialists, built Alabama's industrial sector on coal, iron, graphite, mica, kaolin, cement, soapstone, timber, fertilizer, and water power. In 1892, he produced the first accurate state map. This resulted in his appointment to the 5-man Alabama Highway Commission in 1911. His map remained the standard until 1926. The bulk of this book follows Smith's annual expeditions for 5 decades. Smith's words and his photographs reveal the man's physical stamina, intellectual curiosity, and scientific discernment. Most importantly, they reveal the optimism of the progressive era and its conviction that we can build a better tomorrow. Eugene Allen Smith embodied that spirit, and he changed Alabama.
Thank you, Beth. Next, I'm going to read a little bit of a short story called The Bridge, which was published in Southern Lady magazine in 1999. Christmas 1943, we gave Thula the best present we could think of for a 22-year-old girl who had raised a house full of kids and taken care of a blind and bedridden grandpa. We gave her freedom. She laughed unbelieving when we told her that we 5 younger sisters had decided, now that Grandpa had died, to take over household chores, barn duties, yard work, and the garden so that she could realize her dream of joining the military. How foolish, she said, though I could see a gleam in her eyes. I wouldn't know what to do without home. And home is what Thula meant to us, who stood around us, and we stood around her beaming. We knew that deep in her hearts, we realized the time had come for her to have her chance. I, next younger than Thula, well remembered her nurturing us through illnesses, school crises, broken limbs, and broken hearts while she kept up her studies. Since her high school graduation, we had been her main concern in life. After my graduation, when I needed a job, Thula said, "How about the Women's Army Corps, Rebecca? They'll train you. You'll travel." Shocked, I said, "Thula, you know what they say about the WACs. Bad things. You've heard the jokes." "I don't believe them," she said, her cheeks turning pink. "WACs are helping win the war." She nodded her lip. "I'd join in a minute if..." She jumped up from the kitchen table where her latest bunch of muffins cooled on a rack and went to stare out the window. Our yard sloped down to thick trees edging the creek. From my chair, I couldn't see the covered bridge where the covered bridge used to be, but I knew she could. And I knew she could see the Covington's land across the creek. As long as anybody could remember, Pardue land, ours, and Covington land had lain peacefully side by side, separated only by the creek and connected only by the heart pine covered bridge, snugged together with heart pine pegs. Staring at Thula's slim back, I suddenly knew what she longed in her heart to do. I resolved to help her do it. So did our 4 younger sisters when I talked to them later. We planned how we could run the farm. Eva would get a job at the dime store. Nell would do odd jobs about the settlement and work up a paper route. The youngest 2 would help with the cow, calves, and pigs. I would hold everything together. Following that planning session, we gathered around Thula and made our announcement. Our Christmas gift to you, we're taking over. Finally, tonight, we have Jim Ezel, and he's going to be reading from Stateside Soldier, which is a collection of letters published from the time when Aileen was with the Women's Army Corps. This takes place when she was working as an airplane mechanic, published by the University of South Carolina Press in 2001.
He repeated it, so Betty and I ran to the supply room. The fellows there fitted us with the smallest parachutes available, but they were still so heavy I couldn't walk with mine on. We had plenty of volunteers to carry them out to the plane. The GIs were as excited as we were. Everybody in the hangar waved and yelled goodbye. Captain McDonnell, the pilot, a civilian man, and Lieutenant Disney were already seated in the plane. The crew chief dumped our parachutes in the tail under the gunner's seat and then helped us up the ladder and fastened our seatbelts. We were off. I put on earphones to hear the conversation between Captain McDonnell and the control tower. Control tower. "Captain McDonnell, you have 3 passengers, do you not?" Captain McDonnell: "No, I have 4. Control tower: Lieutenant Disney, Private Kilgore, Private Price. The captain explained that the male civilian, giving practically his life's history. The civilian wore earphones too. He looked at me and laughed, and we said, "How do you do?" to each other, since we had not been previously introduced. Then we taxied down the runway. I was a jumble of feelings, scared and excited, with my stomach fluttering around inside me. Before I realized what was happening, we were airborne, and I was gazing down on Texas. Cows, houses, people, very distinct. I expected a bumpy takeoff, but it was smooth. As soon as we were up, I unfastened my safety belt and walked around to see the best views. We flew down to the bay and far enough over the water to see big ships moving along in the Gulf. The clouds shone silvery white. Looking way down made me dizzy, and when I lifted my hand, I felt gravity pulling on it, but no nausea. Captain Mack banked the plane and turned, making the earth look a kilter and out of place. And once he went like a roller coaster. Wonderful. After we flew around for a while, Lieutenant Disney said, "Let's go down for a Coke," and requested permission to land at the Houston Municipal Airport. As we strolled into the beautiful depot, highfalutin ladies gazed down their noses at us, and beautifully dressed office workers stared. 2 greasy whacks in overalls, a good-looking civilian, a captain, and a Lieutenant Betty who tried to wipe grease off my face. But Captain McDonald laughed and said, "Emily Post says never be ashamed of signs of honest toil." We didn't get a Coke, not even a drink of water, but the civilian bought some cigarettes before we went back to our ship. Parked nearby was a B-17, such as I had never seen, an olive drab paint. The olive drab paint had been removed, leaving it a gleaming silver. Off again, and we flew around some more before returning to Ellington. The field is beautiful from the air, neat and orderly with green grass and green roofs. I picked out our barracks and mess hall. We stayed up an hour and 25 minutes, returning at 4:25 p.m. We found the hangar deserted. The Army doesn't work on Saturday afternoons. They had put away our toolboxes. Captain Mack wrote our names and serial numbers on some kind of report. He said we were good soldiers because we didn't get scared or sick as most people do on their first ride. When we walked into the barracks, everyone wanted to hear about the flight. We told it 10 million times, I know. Camille, Viola, and I were going to the show tonight, but before we left, they made it clear they didn't want to hear any more about my flight or my plane. But near the theater, some soldier yelled, "Hey, how was the flight?" So I had to tell him the whole story. Then in the theater, before the lights went out, 2 or 3 other people came along to hear about it. I was more than willing to tell them. One was a whack who works in the control tower. She'd heard the radio conversations. I could still talk about it now if there was anyone to tell it to. I'll never get over it. Back home after the show, about 8 p.m., I did a big wash. It's hanging around my bed now, drying. The 71st Squadron is giving a party in town tonight and invited the wax detachment. Some of them went. Signed, AK. Well, TWIG would like to encourage you and your children to read some of Aileen's work. They're wonderful. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Thank you, Aileen.
And thank you, Aileen.
Okay, say, we'll say.
Thank you.
We really enjoyed it.
Oh,
Thank you so much. What an effort you put into this. And it just refreshed me in what I had written. It was like somebody else had written it, and I just enjoyed it. Thank you.
Oh, we're so glad, Aileen. Thank you so much. We're ready for the next group of them. So you just keep writing.
Keep writing.
Keep writing. Keep writing.
Yes.
Keep writing.
I like that you put on there in the announcement, her writing so far.
That's right.
That leaves the future.
That's
You got
right.
another 100 years to go.
That's right.
Well, I have lots of thoughts about it. I have appreciated this so very much. My dear friends, you are wonderful to have done all of this. And it is a really thorough overview, I feel, but I can't say good night without saying meow.